Darren Lowell thought he was untouchable, a digital ghost who could outsmart any system. But the exact moment he opened a classified file labeled Operation Red Thread, he triggered a trap that revealed just how closely the FBI had been watching him all along. Darren Lowell blended into the world like a forgotten page in a thick book, present but overlooked. He lived alone in a small brick house on a cul-de-sac in a suburb outside Cleveland, worked remotely as a cybersecurity consultant, and didn't leave much of a digital footprint outside of his profession. To his neighbors, he was courteous and mild, if not a little robotic. He waved when expected, kept his lawn tidy, and never played music past a whisper. He was the ideal tenant, the kind you forget lives next door. But Darren had secrets. Hidden behind layers of encryption and proxies, he maintained an entire parallel existence. For nearly 3 years, he'd been exploiting digital backdoors, siphoning tiny amounts of money from forgotten accounts, and flipping stolen data on dark web marketplaces. His work was meticulous. He never got greedy. A few $100s here, a few thousand there, nothing that would raise red flags. He used burner laptops, bounced signals through countries he couldn't even pronounce, and operated under usernames that shifted weekly. He didn't need the money. What he needed was the thrill, the challenge, the sense that he was outsmarting the very systems designed to catch people like him. Darren's obsession with digital puzzles started when he was a teenager. He wasn't interested in video games or social media. He wanted to see how things worked underneath. While his classmates were streaming movies, Darren was dissecting the networks that delivered them. What began as innocent curiosity evolved into an almost predatory fascination with flaws in security. He believed every system had a weak spot, just waiting for the right mind to find it. One night, browsing through unsecured online cameras, a pastime he considered harmless, he stumbled across something strange. A municipal parking lot in a town he'd never heard of had an unprotected data port broadcasting not just live footage, but logs from the city's internal server. Out of curiosity, he poked around. Within minutes, he found a connection to a loosely guarded law enforcement database. It wasn't deep access, just a view of archived traffic stops and public complaints. But it was the crack in the wall, and Darren couldn't help himself. Over the next few weeks, he quietly explored the system, testing its boundaries. Then, in a moment of audacity, he downloaded a batch of case files marked closed but unresolved. These weren't active investigations, but they weren't buried either. They included witness statements, evidence photos, and surveillance timestamps. He rationalized it to himself. No one's getting hurt, no one's watching, just information, just data. And besides, he wasn't planning to do anything with it. What Darren didn't realize was that one of those files had been quietly flagged for internal monitoring. A dormant alert system buried deep in the server recognized the unauthorized download. It sent a ping. Small. Undetectable by him. But someone, somewhere, saw it. And that was the moment Darren crossed a line he didn't even know existed. Rachel Ellison was the kind of person no one ever expected to vanish. A 27-year-old waitress in a sleepy Michigan town, she worked the late shift at a local diner and was known for her punctuality and calm demeanor. She lived a quiet life in a rented studio apartment, paid her bills on time, and had no known enemies or conflicts. So when she failed to show up for work 2 nights in a row without a call, her co-workers grew worried. By the 3rd day, her manager filed a missing person report. The local police started their investigation the usual way, retracing Rachel's last known steps. Security footage from the diner's parking lot showed her leaving work just before midnight, as always. She got into her compact blue car and drove away. But at the far end of the lot, just barely in frame, a dark-colored sedan could be seen parked on the side street facing the exit. The image was grainy. The license plate was unreadable. The case file was created and added to the regional law enforcement database, categorized as a priority low-risk missing adult. It might have stayed that way for weeks if not for the fact that someone from out of state, accessed it. The database flagged the file access as unusual due to its timing and source. It wasn't internal. It came from an unrecognized IP address located in Ohio. The cybersecurity team assigned to monitor access logs quietly opened a case of their own. They didn't know who Darren Lowell was yet, but they had his signal. At first, the breach looked random. The intruder had viewed several inactive case files, but the Rachel Ellison file was the only one opened multiple times. That suggested interest. What Darren hadn't realized was that this file, though technically inactive, had recently been re-evaluated by a cold case analyst due to a pattern in nearby disappearances. It had been silently tagged for monitoring in the database. His decision to download it and open it repeatedly triggered an alert that got pushed to a higher level than usual. Investigators didn't move immediately. They needed more. Instead, they watched. Darren, meanwhile, felt the adrenaline of having skirted another system. He noticed the Rachel case had no digital trail outside the local server. That made it interesting. But it wasn't personal. He never knew Rachel. She was just part of a file collection, information added to his private archive. He filed it away with the others. Then, for the first time in years, he made a physical copy. He saved the files, including photos and metadata, onto an external hard drive. He told himself it was for offline study, a backup in case his system crashed, but he failed to encrypt the drive. He left it sitting in his basement office drawer, not realizing that this single lapse would undo everything. The authorities didn't need to catch him in the act. They only needed proof of access, proof of storage, and time was no longer on Darren's side. 2 weeks after he downloaded the case files, Darren Lowell found a red envelope in his mailbox. It had no stamp, no address, no markings, just his name typed on a plain white label. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a sentence printed in bold black letters. "We see what you see." That was it. No threats, no explanations, just those 6 words. For the first time in a long while, Darren felt fear. Not the usual paranoia that came with his line of illicit work. This was different. This was personal. Someone had been close enough to hand-deliver a message. Someone knew who he was and what he'd done. He immediately checked his home for surveillance equipment, scanning for hidden cameras and unfamiliar devices. He wiped his systems, reset his router, and went offline for 3 full days. He even considered fleeing the country. He had a fake passport and several $1,000s in crypto stashed in a cold wallet. But instead of running, he convinced himself it was a bluff. No agents had come knocking, no arrests had been made. Maybe it was just someone trying to scare him off. Still, a lingering unease gnawed at him. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, agents in a federal cybercrime unit had officially connected the dots. Darren's activity had been tracked across 3 layers of digital camouflage. His alias, Spectral Circuit, had been identified as a repeat user on a dark web forum known for trafficking stolen law enforcement data. What sealed the connection was a recent transaction. Spectral Circuit had purchased a rare crypto token tied to a wallet that had briefly connected to Darren's home network during a system update. It wasn't a direct admission of guilt, but it was enough to move forward with deeper surveillance. The agents didn't want to arrest him too soon. They wanted to know how far he'd gone and whether he had accomplices. They began remote monitoring of his devices, collected location pings from mobile towers near his residence, and cataloged every search query he made. Darren's behavior became erratic. He started dismantling old laptops, wiping drives, and even burned printed documents in his backyard fire pit late at night. He never noticed the drone hovering silently above the tree line, capturing every second. Eventually, he took the external hard drive, the unencrypted one, and decided to get rid of it. He wrapped it in aluminum foil, placed it in a Ziploc bag, and drove 40 minutes to a state forest. Just after dusk, he parked on a gravel turnout and walked into the woods with a small folding shovel. He dug a shallow hole near a fallen log and buried the drive. What Darren didn't know was that the drone hadn't just followed him, it had live-streamed the entire event. The moment he dropped to his knees and placed the drive in the dirt was time-stamped, recorded, and backed up in 3 separate locations. The authorities didn't just have evidence now, they had undeniable proof. He was still walking around freely, but every step he took was under a microscope, and the circle around him was getting smaller. The FBI had all the pieces, but they needed Darren to make one final move, to prove without doubt that he had knowingly and deliberately accessed restricted law enforcement data, so they set a trap, a carefully constructed digital bait operation known as a honeypot. The team created a fake law enforcement breach scenario and uploaded a fabricated file directory onto a decoy server disguised as vulnerable infrastructure. The contents were convincing: internal memos, surveillance reports, and a highly classified file titled Operation Red Thread. The file was completely fictional, but made to look urgent and sensitive. They planted it on a server Darren had previously poked around, knowing he couldn't resist checking again. It didn't take long. Within 48 hours, Darren was back online, carefully tunneling through proxies to avoid detection. Or so he thought. The agents watched in real time as he navigated the decoy, bypassed the fake firewall, and accessed the files. He downloaded all of them, and then, in a fatal move, he opened Operation Red Thread. That single action triggered an embedded alert, one that immediately logged his device ID, timestamp, and location. The evidence was airtight. It wasn't just about suspicious access anymore. Now they had proof of intent, timing, and physical connection to the data. Darren had walked right into the snare. Still, the FBI didn't act right away. They knew he had other devices, perhaps even more physical evidence hidden somewhere. They wanted to arrest him when he was exposed, away from his systems, unable to destroy anything. That moment came on a gray Monday morning. Darren had resumed a sliver of normal life. He went out for gas, something he rarely did in person. He pulled into a quiet station on the outskirts of town, filled his tank, and walked inside to buy a bottle of water. It was then that 3 unmarked black SUVs surrounded the lot. Within seconds, agents moved in. One blocked the entrance, another moved to the rear, the third came straight at him. Darren froze, realizing what was happening only when he saw the same red envelope, now in the agent's gloved hand, resting against the windshield of one of the vehicles. He didn't fight. He didn't speak. He was cuffed calmly, placed in the back seat, and driven away without any attention drawn to the arrest. No sirens, no shouting, just a quiet, controlled takedown. As he sat in the back of the SUV, watching the suburban streets blur past the window, a numbness crept in. He began calculating possibilities. Could he deny involvement, claim mistaken identity, pin it on someone else? But deep down, he knew the game was over. They hadn't just caught a few downloads. They had watched him bury evidence, tracked his movements, documented his digital signature, and now held confirmation that he knowingly accessed a decoy built to catch him. He wasn't going to talk his way out of this. The system he'd once manipulated had now folded completely around him. Darren sat alone in the gray-walled interrogation room, hands folded on the metal table, heart pounding so loudly it seemed to echo off the walls. No one had spoken to him since his arrival. No accusations, no questions. Just a heavy silence that stretched into tension. The room was cold and bright, humming with artificial light. A small camera in the corner blinked red, watching him, recording every breath, every twitch, every unspoken thought. When the door finally opened, it wasn't what Darren expected. No threats, no raised voices. Just a plain-clothed agent carrying a thick manila folder. The agent said nothing, simply placed the file in front of him and slid it across the table. Darren hesitated, then opened it. Inside were pages of printed screenshots, his search history, server access logs, timestamps of every intrusion, bank transfers tied to aliases, and a detailed breakdown of the fake Operation Red Thread sting. Then came photographs. High-resolution images of him walking through the woods, shovel in hand, external hard drive in a plastic bag. Another image showed the drive in the dirt, time-stamped, GPS tagged, and confirmed. They hadn't just followed him digitally, they had physically watched his every move. And then, at the very back of the folder, a satellite photo. Darren standing alone in a gas station parking lot, hands on his hips, just before the SUVs pulled in. He didn't remember being watched then, but now the angle of the image made it clear. The eye in the sky had never left him. That was the exact moment Darren realized he was done. It wasn't the overwhelming amount of evidence. It wasn't the fact that they had mapped his every digital move. It was the methodical precision with which they had anticipated him. They hadn't just caught what he did, they had understood who he was. They had studied his patterns, predicted his choices, and built a box that he willingly stepped into, thinking it was a shadow. He had underestimated their reach, their patience, and their knowledge of people like him. There would be no technicality to save him, no missing link, no legal loophole. Everything was documented, time-stamped, and matched directly to him. His world, once defined by layers of digital walls, had collapsed into a single stack of undeniable paper. Outside the room, a team was already digging up the hard drive he buried. Another was cataloging his home devices, while analysts cross-checked everything he had ever touched online. His entire digital life, one he had thought was invisible, was now exposed and cataloged like a museum exhibit. In that room, surrounded by silence and proof, Darren wasn't a genius hacker anymore. He wasn't a ghost in the system. He was just a man caught in the open, staring at the weight of his own arrogance. And he understood with chilling clarity that there was no coming back.